Since Walt's death, the animation coming from the Disney Company hadn't created much buzz until drastic changes were made, and by the end of the 1980s, the stars aligned in a way they never had before for the Walt Disney Company, bringing even more success to the company than when Walt was alive. A mixture of public interest, good storytelling, memorable songs, and a push forward in animation technology all led to what we now call the Disney Renaissance. The 1980s saw major changes for the Walt Disney Company. The decade started with problems between the older and younger generations of animators and a board of directors frustrated with the lackluster appeal the Disney Company had. It took Roy E. Disney stepping down and taking over the animation division, as well as an ousting of Walt's son-in-law, Ron Miller, and longtime Disney executive Card Walker, to shake things up. Frank Wells and Michael Eisner were brought into the company to take over as president and CEO, giving a new direction and life to a company seemingly just staying afloat. What that meant for the Disney animation team was that they'd receive a new boss as well. Jeffrey Katzenberg would take over and question everything at the animation studio. Katzenberg allowed the younger generation to change up how things were done at the animation studio. For decades, to save money, the company was using a Xerox style of animation, something that the new generation had learned from the previous one. Katzenberg brought in the use of computer technology to help color and animate some scenes in the films, and after watching The Black Cauldron fail miserably, he wanted to find a way to make Disney's animated films relevant and popular again. To revitalize the animation studio, Katzenberg and Roy Disney brought in Thomas Schumacher and Peter Schneider to help run the production side of things. And he hired up-and-coming musical songwriting duo Howard Ashman and Alan Menken to work on the songs for upcoming films after they had success with Ashman with his work on Oliver and Company. What they didn't know is that the hiring of these four men would change the way the company told stories, leading to their biggest box office success since Walt Disney had passed away over 20 years earlier. That film was The Little Mermaid. Ron Clements and John Musker pitched the idea of the classic Hans Christian Andersen story to Katzenberg at a gong show-style pitch meeting. After sitting on it for a day, Katzenberg put the film into production. Clements and Musker wrote a rough script of The Little Mermaid, and then Howard Ashman brought his thoughts to the story. He said they should change the English crab character to be a Jamaican crab, and that the songs for the film could reflect a Caribbean theme. Ashman also pitched that the story follow a more traditional Broadway script, telling the story in acts, giving the audience a character to fall in love with, and letting the songs push the story forward. Along with the animation team at Burbank, another animation team was created in Orlando, Florida, at the Disney MGM Studios theme park. Now called Disney's Hollywood Studios, the team within the theme park worked on a Roger Rabbit short to play before the film, and to do some of the ink and paint work via computers. Back in Burbank, some new ideas in animation were implemented into the feature, especially for underwater scenes, including airbrushing and backlighting. Another idea exciting the younger animation staff was dusting off the old multiplane camera, an UB iWorks invention giving layers of animated cells a feeling of depth that hadn't been used since the early 1960s for feature animation. Unfortunately, the machine hadn't been used in so long and was in such poor condition that the animation team had to put it completely out of commission and use a different machine at another studio to give an aspect of depth to their movie. Another classic idea from Walt's time was to have live actors come in and perform for the animators. This was the first production to do this since the late 1960s. While in production, Katzenberg was weary that the studio was making a quote-unquote girls film, and that it may not be as big of a success as the studio's previous film, Oliver and Company. But as the film got closer to its release, Katzenberg was convinced he had a hit, and he was right. The Little Mermaid would make $84 million domestically in its initial run. Oliver had made $53 million domestically. This made The Little Mermaid the most successful animated film of all time in its first run at the box office. Outside of the numbers, Disney was also getting praise from critics. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert said it was one of the best Disney films ever made. Praise also came in for Disney's return to the musical format. The praise for Howard Ashman's musical storytelling would change future productions for the animation studio, and as the company headed into the 1990s, the Disney musical formula would carry them to even greater heights. But another movie had been in production alongside The Little Mermaid that would need to come out first, The Rescuers Down Under. The most successful critical and commercial film of Disney's Bronze era was The Rescuers, and in the mid-1980s, a pitch was made for a sequel to The Rescuers, something never done at the Disney Animation Studio previously. Thomas Schumacher was put in charge of the production. He was able to get Bob Newhart and Eva Gabor to return to voice Bernard and Bianca, and a whole new cast of characters were added, setting the sequel in the outback of Australia this time around. The 1980s saw the rise of action-adventure films. Characters like Indiana Jones and Crocodile Dundee became major successes and pop culture figures. To capitalize on that, Disney opted not to make The Rescuers sequel a musical, and instead told a more straightforward story, wowing audiences with innovative animation, rather than catchy songs. The Rescuers Down Under is most notable for its heavy use of computers. The sequel was the first film to have animators working out of both California and Florida on the project, not just coloring the scenes. 10 minutes of the film was made completely separate from the Burbank crew, piecing everything together over the computer. CGI was used on many elements of the film, including Mick Leach's truck and perspective shots of flight. The Little Mermaid had used several ways to ink their film, but The Rescuers Down Under was fully colored on the computer. The animation team used a program called Computer Animation Production Systems, or CAPS, to do all of their work, something that Pixar had helped create, also making this the first film that Pixar and Disney worked together on, opening the door for an eventual production collaboration from Pixar on their first film a few years later. Despite its push forward in animation technology, The Rescuers Down Under didn't become the follow-up success Disney was hoping for. Its initial run in 1990 saw the movie gross $27 million in the US, running up against stiff competition from movies like Home Alone and the fifth The Rocky movie. After its first week in the theater, Katzenberg opted to stop advertising for the film, letting it die, and not continue to bleed out from the marketing side of things. Schumacher was devastated with such a tragic end to his production. But he was assured that everything would be okay, and that he should focus on the next animated movie to come out, as it was in production for a 1991 release, and that a film called Beauty and the Beast would capitalize on the success of The Little Mermaid. Early attempts to make Beauty and the Beast into an animated feature date all the way back to the 1930s, with Walt wanting to follow up the success of Snow White, but nothing ever got off the ground. In 1987, the idea was brought back to life in England after Who Framed Roger Rabbit director Richard Williams recommended his friend Englishman Richard Purdom. Purdom went to work with a crew in England on a non-musical story. But after seeing storyboard reel animations and with the success of The Little Mermaid as a musical, the movie was scrapped by Katzenberg, and he asked the animation team to start over after 2 years of work. Purdom opted to leave the production, and Kirk Wise and Gary Truesdale were asked to direct the film, along with Menken and Ashman to write the songs and score. Howard Ashman had been working on the next feature film, but reluctantly joined the team for Beauty and the Beast. Learning that he was dying due to complications with AIDS, the Beauty and the Beast team rewrote the film near his home in New York City. A normal production schedule for a Disney animated feature is 4 years, but because the film had already been in development for 2 years, the new team only had 2 years to turn their new script into a finished product. Once again, the animation team used the CAPS program to color and add shading to the movie, also allowing for new camera angles, and both the California and Florida teams were put on the project. Story artists were flown back and forth to New York to work with Ashman, and recording sessions for the orchestra and voice actors also took place in New York so that Menken and Ashman could work with them. Ashman would pass away prior to the film's release, but he knew it would turn out to be a major success. The movie would actually become a major hit, garnering critical admiration, with many critics stating that lightning had struck twice. Beauty and the Beast would actually surpass The Little Mermaid, making $145 million domestically at the box office, and over $350 million worldwide. The box office numbers would be followed with major awards, including a Golden Globe win for Best Musical or Comedy Film, the first time an animated film had ever won a major award like that at the Golden Globes. It would also make history as the first animated film to ever be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, Hollywood's most prestigious award show. The animation studio, which only 6 years prior had put out what most people considered their worst film in company history, had officially turned the corner and made it all the way to the top of Hollywood. But Jeffrey Katzenberg was already looking ahead to the next production, Aladdin. Originally pitched by Howard Ashman with a 40-page script, Aladdin was to be his crowning achievement. But after getting attached to Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin was shelved to be the follow-up film to Beauty and the Beast. After Ashman's death, the Little Mermaid directors Ron Clements and John Musker were asked to rewrite the Aladdin story. They delivered a story reel to Jeffrey Katzenberg in April 1991, and he said to scrap the story and not to rely on Howard Ashman's songs and script so heavily, nixing some of the characters and changing around the settings and story elements. Katzenberg also refused to move the scheduled release date, forcing the team to make the entire film from scratch in only a year and a half this time around. Production teams in California and Florida were all working on separate characters and using the cap system to make the animation tie together between the two teams. While animation was going strong, Musker and Clements worked with the cast on recording the voices. They wrote several characters based around the actors who voiced them, including Gilbert Gottfried's Iago and Robin Williams' Genie. In the case of Robin Williams, he cut a unique deal with the Disney company. As a thank you for the role of a lifetime in 1987's Good Morning Vietnam, Williams agreed to record the role of the Genie for only $75,000 instead of the $8 million price tag he was asking for on other roles. Because he was also working on a rated R film named Toys to come out a month after Aladdin, he wanted to keep the marketing material void of his name and voice, so that Toys wouldn't lose any steam in its marketing. Katzenberg agreed to the terms, but after Williams had finished up with the production, the Genie was heavily marketed as the main reason to come to see Aladdin. To get around the agreement, they did not use Williams' name, but that also allowed them to make money on merchandise featuring the Genie while not paying Williams anything extra beyond the original contract. The shady tactics in marketing worked, as Aladdin became the third major hit for the Walt Disney Company, debuting in November 1992, grossing over $200 million in the United States, making it the highest-grossing film of the year, and setting the new record for the highest-grossing animated film ever. Critical praise was mixed for Aladdin, however, as some critics praised Robin Williams for his maniacal performance, while others panned the mostly ad-libbed work. Likewise, critics were not as excited for the songwriting that mostly came from the new lyricist, Tim Rice, who replaced Howard Ashman's songs in the film, working with Alan Menken on the score. Regardless of the criticisms, the Disney Animation team was riding high, and it seemed as though they wouldn't be losing momentum anytime soon, especially with the most bold film to come, being The Lion King. The Lion King story started as a conversation between Roy Disney, Peter Schneider, and Jeffrey Katzenberg in 1988. Over the next several years, the story went through rewrite after rewrite as it was Disney's first take on an original story, deriving some of its elements from Hamlet and the Bible. With so many rewrites happening, many animators opted to work on Pocahontas, which was being made at the same time, claiming that it would become the bigger film of the two. But Katzenberg felt like The Lion King was going to work and would be perfect. Becoming his pet project, Katzenberg assembled an all-star cast for the film. Jonathan Taylor Thomas, Matthew Broderick, James Earl Jones, Whoopi Goldberg, Cheech Marin, Jeremy Irons, and many others were brought in to voice the roles. Tim Rice was brought back on as a lyricist with songwriter Hans Zimmer, but legendary musician Elton John, was brought in as well to write several songs. Marketing for The Lion King started in 1993, with only a third of the film completed. A deliberate lack of story was added to the trailer, which only featured the stunning circle of life scene from the first few minutes of the film. The idea was to build intrigue with the beauty of the opening scene. Producer Don Hahn was worried that the hype was too much for the film and that it would under-deliver, but that was not the case. Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin had shattered the records set by The Little Mermaid at the box office, and The Lion King would do the same, but at a much bigger level, grossing $422 million in the US, becoming the most successful film of 1994, and once again, the highest grossing animated film of all time. Critics also loved the film, calling it emotional and beautiful. The huge success of The Lion King, especially in the United States, led to a popularity of the Lion King characters. But in Japan, Simba was creating controversy. Many Japanese animation fans and artists saw a major resemblance between The Lion King and Osamu Tezuka's anime series Kimba the White Lion. Tezuka was considered Japan's Walt Disney, and many felt like the likeness couldn't have been lost on the company that Tezuka was compared to. Many at the Disney studio, including voice actor Matthew Broderick, even assumed they were making an American version of Tezuka's classic television character. Regardless of the knowledge, or lack thereof, the Walt Disney Company had an even bigger problem than Kimba the White Lion. In 1993, Jeffrey Katzenberg had asked Michael Eisner to make him president of the Walt Disney Company, which was already Frank Wells' position. To do so, Wells would need to move to a different role. Michael Eisner believed that the success of the Disney Animation team had gotten to Katzenberg's ego. Katzenberg had already double-crossed Robin Williams at that point and was working his animation team into some serious overtime to make sure films were meeting their deadlines. In fact, many of the animation team were open about feeling like they never saw their families, or that their hands were cramping up from the amount of drawing they had to do. However, Katzenberg claimed that Eisner told him he would be next in line if anything ever happened to Wells. Unfortunately, something did happen. 2 months before the release of The Lion King, Frank Wells died in a helicopter crash, which left Eisner to take on the responsibilities left over at the studio. Katzenberg continued to ask for the chance to become president. However, Roy Disney didn't feel like Katzenberg would be a good president. Whether it was because of personal or professional feelings is totally unclear, but Eisner refused to give Katzenberg the new position, and after becoming intolerable to deal with, he was forced to resign from his position as the head of Disney Animation just a few months after the major success of The Lion King. Katzenberg took Disney to court, settling for $250 million, and he met with David Geffen and Steven Spielberg to start his own animation studio, DreamWorks. In just a span of 5 years, Disney had seen some of its biggest success with some of its biggest losses. Howard Ashman renewed the musical Disney animated feature, leading the way for so much of its success. But without him, the songs and storytelling would begin to fall flat. With the loss of Frank Wells, Michael Eisner was left to run the studio by himself, something that he was eventually not ready to do. And despite some of his tactics, Jeffrey Katzenberg took charge of a team of animators and created the most profitable and critically acclaimed films in the company's history. But just as they had risen with Katzenberg, they would begin to fall without him. If you haven't seen the rest of our Disney Animation History series, be sure to check out the playlist in the description below. And part 2 of the Disney Renaissance era will be coming soon. Until then, if you want to help out the channel, you can do it in a few ways. First of all, the easiest way would be to subscribe to our channel and check out everything we have going on. You could also pick up a t-shirt design from our store, which is also in the description, or check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/network1901. I'm Angie from Network 1901, and until next time, hurry back!